Thank you for joining us for this Corporate Investment and Racial Equity panel. My name is Gail Coles-Johnson, and I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer for the Executive Leadership Council. And we are joined here today by our esteemed panelists, and I'm going to ask them to stand when I call their names so that you will know who they are. Tia Hodges, President and CEO at MetLife Foundation. We need cheering squads. We need cheering squads. Thank you. Monique Baptiste. Monique is not with us. Cadene Russell. Yes, Cadene Russell Brooks, legal counsel at WilmerHale. And Cadene is also currently on settlement as legal counsel at Google. Fabrice Coles, Senior Manager of Global Public Policy at PayPal. And Jonay Holkins, Senior Director of Policy at Business Roundtable, is also joining us today. So thank you all, distinguished panel, for being here. So my first question, and I'm going to bounce around a lot, but I do want everybody to feel free to jump in if you'd like to join as a part of the topic. But we're going to start with you, Jonay. You are at the Business Roundtable. For those of you who don't know, it's an association of CEOs of America's leading companies. I know you have a racial equity task force, and you've been following this issue of racial equity commitments very closely. Could you tell us about the work of that task force and how it has encouraged or assisted member companies in making and fulfilling their racial equity commitments?
Yes, so back in 2020, in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, and then also recognizing the pandemic's disproportionate impact on communities of color, and in particular, Black and Latino communities, Business Roundtable announced a corporate commitment to really do more around advancing or accelerating the closing of the racial wealth gap. That commitment initially started with really advocating for police reform. So we spent most of last year and the previous year really pushing for bipartisan support on some police reform legislation. We all know where that ended up. It didn't quite make it where we wanted to, but it's something that we still continue to see as a priority. That then was followed by some concrete set of corporate actions and initiatives that included really looking at, all the things that affect the racial wealth gap: housing, education, employment, looking at the justice system. We did some work around healthcare and health equity as well. And of course, finance. We know that that is a huge part of closing the racial wealth gap. You have to look at the pockets of how, communities, what they have to spend, what they have to contribute, and making sure that they can really afford to live in this and contribute and be fully a part of our economic system. So, a lot of that work is really focused on economic opportunity for everyone, but we have to start by looking at how do you can't lift all boats and close gaps at the same time. You really have to be intentional about that work. And so I think that's what we're focused on at Business Roundtable.
And are there any particular companies or industries that you would say are making substantive strides? And conversely, are there companies or industries that could be doing a lot better?
So, the companies that have really stepped up have been great leaders. Some of them are on the stage with us. MetLife has done some amazing work. PayPal and the work of Dan Schulman, also amazing. The way that they have been able to, one, get capital out to Black-owned small businesses, which I'm sure Fabrice will share a lot more about. We have companies like JPMorgan Chase. I know Monique isn't here with us, but they've done some excellent work around second chance hiring and really removing barriers to entry for jobs for people with criminal histories. I like to highlight the best practices to motivate other companies to really get into action and do some of the same things.
Great. So MetLife and PayPal, in other words, Tia and Fabrice. Could you all give us an update on your companies? What movement have you seen and what work still needs to be done there? So we'll start with you, Fabrice.
Thank you. And thank you very much to the Joint Center for the invitation. I think we have a long way to go. You know, intentionality, as you mentioned, is the critical component here. But there's just so much left to do. PayPal, you know, is a company that I think tries to live, you know, its vision and kind of mission of financial inclusion. And, you know, after George Floyd was murdered, I think there was a decision made that, you know, whatever it was doing at the time, partnerships, support for different communities, more had to be done. And so PayPal decided to put in pretty much $500 million into that effort to try and boost racial equity. But there was a recognition that obviously it's not something that you can do on your own. It's something you have to have partnerships to do if you're going to do it well and try and make an impact. And so, you know, the CEO, Dan Schulman, just made sure to select partners that have been doing the work, putting their shoulders into this, being intentional already, and trying to put the wind at their back as they are serving the communities that they understand. So we partner with CDFIs, we partner with MDIs to deploy access to capital. We partner with diverse venture capital firms so that we can get more money into the hands of diverse founders. There were grants that were given directly to small businesses, $15 million worth of grants directly to small businesses during one of the hardest moments in the century to be a small business. But you know, there's still so much more to do, and that's why I think at PayPal, what we're doing is we're trying to look to the next phase. $535 million have already been deployed, invested, et cetera. We're working with our partners to track and monitor impact so that we can tell that story and demonstrate to the rest of the corporate community as well. Listen, you can do it too. And you know, in making that encouragement, you know, partnering with others like at the Business Roundtable to tell that story so that people can understand that it's not rocket science. Go ahead and make that decision and do it. Write the check, support the organization, do the work. But there's so much more to be done, and that's why, you know, one of our most recent initiatives, again, continuing on the theme of partnership, has been to work with Robert Smith, work with BCG on something called the Southern Communities Initiative, which is focused on 6 southern cities. But the idea is to boost access to capital, support SMEs, support HBCUs, and support, you know, just ecosystems. And again, partners that are doing things on the ground already to really put the wind at their back. But also partnering with the federal government and other corporations as well via the Economic Opportunity Council, which was recently announced by Vice President Harris over the summer, to again focus on access to capital, see what can be done to support technology transitions as CDFIs and MDIs, you know, but again, boost that intentionality and really recognize and communicate that the work is not done. I think one of the things that we're observing is, I think there are a lot of folks that are surprised that somehow racism wasn't eradicated in 2 years. Surprise, surprise. This is a long game. And I think, you know, one of the takeaways for me personally, and I think also for my company, is that, you know, you really have to be committed over the long haul. You know, this system was not built in a day. This is several hundred years in the making. And so to promote racial equity and actually achieve things in it, with your partners and with the communities that matter here, you know, you really have to be committed over the long run. That's a part of what Southern Communities Initiative is about. That's a part of what the Treasury's Economic Opportunity Coalition is about. And, you know, I'm glad to be with a company that's committed over the long run here. But there is just so much more to do. You know, $500 million was a good start, and there's more to come.
Tia, talk to us about MetLife. There's a lot to be done. What have you all done, and what still needs to be done?
Yeah, how do you follow that? I don't know. That's tough. I think a couple of things. So I second, third, everything everyone on the panel has said thus far. It's intentionality, it's thoughtfulness, it's strategic partnerships. It's in it for the long game. And I think a lot of focus was always on philanthropy, whether corporate or private, to say, oh, philanthropy will fix it, but it's not enough for the philanthropic dollars. The business community has to be there. I joined MetLife about a year ago, just a little over a year ago, so I'm in my infancy at the company, but had been in corporate philanthropy at another financial services firm. What was true then is true today at MetLife, is bringing the business into it, so it's not the reliance on the philanthropic arm to drive all of the change. It's the company from a CEO all the way through the institution. It's from changing and shifting hiring practices permanently, addressing specific programs, initiatives for the long term in terms of hiring more Black and brown women, investing through impact investments in small and mid-sized companies, diversifying, even on the grant-making side, thinking about how we diversify the partners that we're working with who are proximate to the issues, but it has to be a philanthropic and business standpoint. And I'm not even talking about all the things that we're doing. For example, our CEO runs a DEI roundtable internally. So, and that also brings external stakeholders with internal stakeholders. So I think we're in the journey. You know, it was 400 plus years to get here. We have to be committed for 400 plus for the long haul, but it can't just all be philanthropy. It has to be across the entire business. And I will say one other thing is that we put so much on communities to say, if you just go to school, if you just manage your money, if you just do this, you just do that. And I'm really tired of the if you just, but internally we have to change. And that even means me looking in the mirror and saying, what are my grant making policies, procedures? How am I approaching our grantees? Do I have that gut punch if I'm gonna, give a grant organization run by a Black person versus white? I need to check my own biases. We need to do that in the hiring. It has to be throughout. So we put so much on our communities to change. If you just, and we need to just shift, some of that or a lot of that burden onto those that are, it's baked into our system. That's why they call it systemic.
Very good. Excellent, excellent. Cadene, as you know, immediately after George Floyd's death, and let's just be intentional and call it what it was, after George Floyd's murder, many Black employees at major companies came to the Joint Center asking for ideas about what their companies could do to advance diversity in hiring, promotion, the C-suite, the boardroom, and retaining third-party vendors. One obstacle they faced was coworkers who were hesitant to take action because they thought that promoting diversity would be reverse racism that violated the law. The Joint Center took this issue to your firm, WilmerHale, and you and Ron Machin to help clear up this issue. Can you tell us a little bit about how your team responded to this and cleared up this cloudiness and hesitation?
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you for the question, and thank you to the Joint Center. Spencer, thank you to your team for the invitation. You're right. There are a lot of companies who are interested in improving diversity and inclusion sort of amongst their ranks. They're interested in reducing or ridding systemic bias. But the problem is there are challenges that will come about in terms of legal challenges. There may be dissent or dissatisfaction internal to your company from people who are hesitant about the diversity initiatives that you're interested in unrolling. And there are sometimes challenges that you face where there are companies who don't know what goals to establish or how to take steps to establish the different diversity and inclusion goals that they're setting for themselves. So the Joint Center approached my colleague Ron Machin and our team at WilmerHale and asked us if we could create a toolkit, essentially a report or a framework for companies who are interested in improving diversity amongst your ranks, who are interested in improving the experiences of inclusion that employees have within your companies. And they asked us to prepare something or put together something that corporations and other organizations can use as a guidepost for the work that you're trying to do. So we published a 5-part toolkit. Part 1 is focused on understanding bias in the workplace and establishing responsibility for diversity. So that looks like, for example, making sure that companies are creating opportunities for employees and senior executives, your board, et cetera, to actually understand what bias looks like and how when people are experiencing bias, how that manifests for Black and brown folks in the workplace. That looks like collecting and analyzing data and making sure that you're not only reviewing what diversity looks like in your companies, but disclosing that information to your key stakeholders so they can help hold you accountable. That looks like taking steps to ensure that you're actually identifying what the barriers to equal employment are in your workplace. And even going beyond that, some companies have gone ahead and tied executive compensation to diversity efforts. Those are some of the things that we address in part 1 of the report to try and give companies sort of a baseline for where to begin as they're moving forward with their diversity initiatives. Part 2 is focused on recruitment, hiring, and retention, and all the things that you all can think of in terms of when someone is first coming in the door and what your applicant pool looks like, to what your interview practices and hiring practices look like, to once you have employees that are ultimately in your ranks, what are you doing to help reduce social isolation that some people are experiencing when they're getting in the door? What are you doing to make sure that employees are supported and that they have the resources to do the work that they need to do once they're there? So that is the focus of part 2. Part 3 is focused on diversity initiatives related to your board of directors. Similar to the focus for recruitment, hiring, and retention, diversity at the board level, you need to be focusing on what your applicant pool looks like. Who are the people that you're selecting? Not solely looking at the same circle of 5 to 10 board members going from one company to the next company to the next company, but identifying ways to broaden the pool of individuals that you're bringing in the door. And then once you have Black board members or other diverse members on your board, what are the steps that you're taking to support and ensure that they're leading in these positions? And then part 4 of the report focuses on your third-party business relationships. So what are you doing with your suppliers and the vendors that you're working with? What are you doing with the other business partners like law firms, accounting firms, et cetera, who you're bringing in to partner on the various efforts that you have at your firm? Successful DEI doesn't solely exist within the 4 corners of your organization, and racial equity and equity improvements within our companies and within our communities will happen when you're making requirements of other vendors that you're working with and looking to them to see what their diversity initiatives are and making requirements of them so that your employees will benefit, your senior executives will benefit, et cetera, but the other touch points that you have outside of your organization will matter as well. And then part 5, which is the last part of the report, focuses on minimizing legal risk. For me, as an attorney, it's one of the most important parts of the report. Not only do we want to make sure that you are taking steps and pushing boundaries as it relates to making sure that you're doing the work, but we also want you all to have a clear understanding of what's permissible within the law so that you can help minimize legal risk.
Excellent, excellent. And I'm going to open this question up to all of our panelists and think about the 5 parts of the report that she said, and even in your own experiences. There could be allies of Black communities working within companies who are facing obstacles, real obstacles, getting their coworkers to move on fulfilling commitments. What strategies should these allies use to get their coworkers to see the importance of fulfilling equity commitments and motivate the coworkers to make more progress? Anybody on our panel want to take that one?
That's a great question, and I'll say that I really think it starts from the top, right? When we look at our member companies, the companies that are truly leading in this space, it's because their CEOs have made it very clear priority for the rest of the employees, right? So that could include, creating incentives or really attaching, pay and bonuses to progress, right? That looks like creating a team of folks around an issue, so it's not just one person advocating for for the work that needs to happen, right? It's creating the internal infrastructure for the work to happen and expecting accountability with that. And so I think that's really where you see kind of the best companies who are doing that well. They're the ones that are leading, and it's too much for one person. It's too much for one person in any institution to try to bring their colleagues along. It really does take that buy-in at the top level. So it's a great question, but it shouldn't be on that one individual to try to change all the hearts and minds of everyone in their company. I just think that's that's a hard task.
Excellent, excellent. And Cadene, as our legal expert, could you give us a general overview of what companies can do within the bounds of the law to advance diversity with employee hiring and development and with retaining diverse third-party vendors? What should companies avoid? I know people should look at it at the toolkit for specifics, but we're just looking for some examples to give the audience of the value of the toolkit, and kind of even playing a little bit off of what Jonay just said, for those employees who may be in decision-making positions, what are some lawful things that they can do that they don't have to be afraid of touching this?
Absolutely. So I first have to say I continue to be excited to hear the things that my co-panelists have talked about, because many of what they have suggested and mentioned that their companies are doing are things that we all should be considering in terms of what our company should be looking to do, and the initiative that we should be looking to unfold. So I'll talk specifically about recruitment, hiring, and retention, and supplier diversity in a moment. But I'll say, sort of more broadly or more generally speaking, when you as employers, when you as corporations are looking to expand opportunities for your employee base or applicants, et cetera, and essentially remedy segregation, remedy discrimination that has occurred sort of over the history of our experience and our existence during our lifetimes. One of the things that you need to keep in mind is, yes, the goal is to expand opportunities for example, Black professionals, a particular targeted group. But in doing so, you have to refrain from or try not to preclude opportunities for non-targeted individuals. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing to sort of keep in mind. Expanding opportunities for some does not mean limiting or reducing or precluding others from some of these opportunities. Quotas is another thing, sort of at a high level or generally speaking. The EEOC sort of looks at quotas as reliance on numbers that's not based on qualifications, and certainly I think we can understand that that's something that we wouldn't want to rely on when we're making employment decisions. But more broadly, when you have opportunities to support your employees, such as employee resource groups, trainings, et cetera, like those types of opportunities, that will less likely create friction and sort of pushback when you're trying to decide what types of opportunities you want to unfold within your companies. I want to talk about recruitment, hiring, and retention very briefly, and then supplier diversity. Thinking about, or starting at recruitment, for example, I'd mentioned that there are a few key things that you all want to keep in mind. There are some laws that you all have to keep in mind as well when you're making decisions. Title VII, for example, is one of them, which essentially prohibits employers from making employment decisions on the basis of race. But Title VII will allow you, for example, to expand the pool of applicants, expand the individuals who you're looking at and trying to recruit to become a part of your organizations. So for example, if you look at the pool of applicants that are coming into your company and you're seeing that there are fewer numbers of Black applicants than what you would expect from sort of our makeup in the workforce, something that you can do is start thinking about, okay, what do my strategic partnerships look like? What opportunities do I have that exist that will allow me to increase the number of Black people that are sort of coming before us and coming into this applicant pool? So I can partner with HBCUs, mm-hmm. I can partner with executive talent pipelines, I can sponsor sort of diversity fairs and job fairs, I can even engage with recruiters who are specifically recommending diverse applicants or Black applicants to your jobs and your roles. Those are things that you can sort of think about at the front end of the recruiting process. There's also research to suggest that if you are looking at the final applicant pool that you're reviewing for a particular role, if you have at least 2 underrepresented individuals in that pool, then there is a much more significant likelihood that one of those individuals will ultimately be hired for the role. However, if there's only 1 in the pool, et cetera, I think many of you have probably heard of like the Rooney Rule and those types of things. When you limit the number of diverse applicants in that pool, there's less likelihood that they'll ultimately get the job. So you want to think about ways to not limit, but expand who is coming before you during sort of the recruitment process. And even in hiring, thinking about if you have sort of a streamlined, but also clear markers and benchmarks for what the individuals coming into your organization should look like. What does the hiring process look like? What do your recruiting panels look like? What do your sort of the job postings look like, and are they inclusive, and do they include language that's not going to bias against certain demographics of individuals? And then thinking about once you have individuals that are actually in the door, I'd mentioned briefly earlier, I believe at least, social isolation that Black professionals, that Black people sometimes experience when they come in the door of your organizations. I'd mentioned employee resource groups, I'd mentioned training that is important, but you also should be thinking about what types of opportunities you are putting these employees in that will allow them to have speaking engagements and attend networking opportunities. You want to start creating more and more opportunities for these professionals to shine. And when companies are intentional about doing that, that will ultimately help ensure that you have fewer and fewer issues of attrition and things like that for individuals that are coming in the door. I'll mention briefly supplier diversity. A couple quick things that you all can think about. One is, and this is something that companies like AT&T and Meta and others have done, commit to a certain level of spend for Black suppliers or diverse suppliers. I think AT&T a few years ago committed to maybe $3 billion of spend or so by 2025, something along those lines. Meta similarly has committed to maybe $1 billion or so of spend to diverse suppliers, and maybe $100 million of that will specifically go to Black-owned suppliers. So thinking about opportunities like that where dollars can be pushed towards diverse businesses to help continue to bolster their economies, but also ensure that you're continuing to partner with and work with diverse organizations in that way. Also communicating to suppliers your expectations that they're building out their diversity programs and their diversity initiatives, and allowing that to be something that's potentially a requirement for them to engage in business with you. And something that applies, I think, across the board for all of your initiatives potentially is tying executive compensation to supplier diversity, to other forms of initiatives that are unfolding within your companies. All of those things, I think, will be helpful to make sure that you all are requiring or asking the organizations, the third-party business partners that you're working with to honor your commitment to continue to build out DEI, but also come along on that journey so that everyone can continue to improve.
I'd like to jump in here.
Absolutely.
To just provide some examples. I think everything you said is so on point and necessary. Getting to, I think, the work that needs to happen around DEI. Some of our member companies are taking real steps through partnerships with Thurgood Marshall College Fund. Apple and Southern Company recently announced new Propel Center. It's a center that will be here hopefully for years to come, and it's really aimed around training around STEM education, so making sure that the HBCU students have the resources and the tools needed to be competitive in the marketplace. And so that's one really cool example of how member companies are leaning into helping diversify that pipeline. I also want to highlight some of the work that we're doing at BRT and thinking about how do we help diversify the C-suite. So we just recently actually announced a partnership with McKinsey to really think about how do we focus on those individuals who are 1 to 2 levels down from the C-suite, make sure that they have the network, the support, a sponsor, a program champion, someone in their company that's really willing to kind of push for them so that they can make those moves up, further up the C-suite. And so we're excited to announce that that will be led by CEO Scott Kirby of United. And we're looking forward to having many other member companies really participate and join in that initiative. And I want to also hit on the small business supplier diversity point that you hit on. Thinking about, I think a really important piece of that is professional services, and you touched on it. One example of that is some of the work that Vista Equity Partners is doing through the Southern Communities Initiative and as part of the White House's recent Economic Opportunity Coalition, and that is looking at really moving 2% of the firm's balance over to CDFIs and MDIs. I think that's such a powerful thing to do. You know, I don't know that most companies think of, you know, banks as one of the line items for supplier diversity, but that's I think a transformational thing that really does have an impact at the community level. And so those are things that we want to encourage and make sure we see more of. So just wanted to share those little bits of some examples from how corporations are really leaning into some of that.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for joining in and jumping in with those examples. I'm very familiar with the work that AT&T is doing, having been with AT&T for 32 years, and so one of the things, and also the work of Thurgood Marshall, where I sat on their board, and one of the things that you talked about was not only a level of intentionality, a level of commitment, but also transparency about what they were doing. So I'd like to hear from all of our panelists around this whole area of transparency and the value of transparency. So let me read you about this statistic. The Harvard Law School Corporate Racial Equity Tracker examines racial equity commitments at the 100 largest employers in the US. In the last year, it seems as though there has been an increase in disclosure of workforce and board diversity data to over 90% of these companies. Unfortunately, fewer than 10% of the companies disclose their promotion rate by race or small business spend amount. So what is the role of disclosure in advancing equity? And I'm throwing this out to anyone on the panel.
I'll take that, and you know, and just say that I think that it's been my observation, you know, not only in my company, but I think it, you know, most of the companies, you know, there's a theme is consistent here. There's more work to be done. You know, and I think that what matters, though, for me, in doing some of this work is it also, you know, more transparency that needs investment. You know, and you know, but it can't be an excuse to not do more. There are some partners, you know, they'll say, well, what's the impact of this and what's the impact of that? And it's like, well, I don't know, we haven't done it yet. And so let's not make it an excuse where there is not data, where there is not transparency yet. Can we invest in that together? Is that a solution that we can work together towards, internally and externally? Is that something we can boost? Because it's not the only thing. It's a part of a number of solutions that need to be a part of a kind of portfolio of responses here. And you know, but I think the short answer to your question is I think most of corporate America can do much better here. And you know, I know that you know the government's involved in some of this as well. You know, there's kind of labor market policies there, and there's oversight taking place as well. And so you know, I think that we're only going to get better over time in this particular space. You know, but I think it's, you know, like other things in this effort, you have to be intentional. You have to resource it. You really have to lean in and boost. And if I could just really quick, just 'cause I didn't want to interrupt earlier, but just such a great conversation. You know, just something I want to get off my chest is, you know, and the transparency is a part of this as well. Something I've been fond of telling folks is, listen, let's keep that same energy. In 2020, when millions globally were in the streets, you know, everybody had a hashtag, everybody had a black social media thing. You know, and now it's 2022, about to be 2023. Let's find a way to keep that same energy. And I think that to your question earlier about how to sustain some of that, I think we have to bring all of this together, and this is where the transparency comes in. We have to bring all this together and make it very clear. This is not a nice to have. These conversations that we're having today, it's not like, oh, you know, this is great. It's like, no. This is also business.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, a part of keeping that same energy and convincing, especially internal stakeholders, of the necessity to take the long view is that this is not some strictly philanthropic thing. It's a moral imperative, yes, but there are commercial considerations you have to take seriously. I think a part of the reason you saw so many hashtags and things like that after Floyd was murdered is that you had a very visible representation of customers who care about these issues. Customers, employees, stakeholders, people that matter to your bottom line. And the people that you're going to have to convince internally to do certain things, including investing in transparency, a lot of them have a P&L. And they're like, how does this help me make money? How does this reduce my costs? Well, let's sit down. Let's talk about willingness to pay and what the values consumer really wants and how that's going to boost their engagement with your brand. Let's talk about how it's going to reduce your customer acquisition costs because you better understand your customer and what it is they value and what it is they're going to actually pay up for. Let's talk about how it's going to save you costs on losing staff because you're not managing those kinds of things internally the right way. So there are strategic considerations related to cost, revenue, profit. In all of these conversations. And I think that that's something that is going to be critical in the days, months, and weeks, and et cetera, years to come, let's keep that same energy by focusing on the moral imperative, yes, but the commercial considerations and incentives that are here and that are apparent if you care.
There you go.
Can I
Love it. Please.
chime in on that?
Go right
I
ahead,
just
Tia.
want to piggyback off of what you're saying. That's one of the things I do with internal stakeholders is really reflect on and have the conversation around the economics behind not engaging, especially from an insurance standpoint. So you have life insurance, you've got annuities, you've got 401ks, you've got dental, vision, and it's an economic imperative for the company to really understand the customer, the consumer, because I think we're already a majority minority already, regardless of what the data is saying. But for those who are in sales or on the business side, I constantly reflect on the fact that we're a diverse country, and therefore we must, not only from a philanthropic standpoint, but also from a diversity standpoint, really engage with our diverse communities regardless, because at the end of the day, they do hit at our bottom line. If people are not acquiring legal, dental, vision, life insurance, we're not surviving as a company, and I no longer have a job to be able to do the philanthropy. On the transparency end, I think there's so much pressure on companies to be transparent. You can either, I was saying this about the metaverse, you can either join it or you can get pushed in. The expectation from external stakeholders, from customers, clients, and also from employees to be transparent, radically transparent on what you're doing, but it also has to be authentic and genuine. So just putting out any number or showcasing any type of data is not going to be enough. It has to be genuine and authentic on that. But it is necessary, and I think it's only going to grow.
Absolutely.
I think the pressure is there and it's growing.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is going to be my last question for the panel, so I want you all to start thinking about your questions, jot them down. I'm going to open it up to you all for questions. And I'm going to throw this out to anyone who would like to answer this one. Right now, environmental, social, and governance standards of companies has been under attack by some politicians who are not particularly concerned about racial equality or racial equity. Some who are vested in racial equity are skeptical of the private sector and have not really prioritized defending these ESG standards. Is the debate over ESG standards important? What does racial equity lose if investors and companies cave to political attacks and retreat from ESG standards? Anyone can take that.
Wow, I feel like we're at that moment right here, right now. I'll just start. I don't have the perfect answer, but what I will say is, and I think this is what you may have been getting to, is that our eye has fallen off the ball. So 2020 provided that opportunity to really drill down, and I think personally, so not as MetLife Foundation, I'm just saying personally, I think it is advantageous for some people for us to take our eye off the ball, right? And not talk and invest and see the value that an ESG framework can bring to the table. I'm not saying it's, so I think, there's just, there's a lot to be gained for some by caving. And I was on a webinar, someone asked me about woke. How do you deal with wokeness? And so I, also get the feeling that sometimes people may view the conversation around ESG as woke, and I'm wondering if that is part of that broader conversation or ecosystem. So I think we have to keep our eye on the ball and really maintain that the focus on equity, racial equity, diverse communities, Black communities is essential to all of our economic viability. No one loses. It's not a zero-sum game. You all have heard that. Heather McGhee, I believe, wrote about it in her book, and many others. But that's just my 2 cents on that, personally and professionally.
Great 2 cents. Great 2 cents.
I think, could I just add
Please.
to that? I just, it builds off of some what I was saying, but it's, a couple of years back, BRT, I think, came out with, an expanded articulation of what capitalism can be. And I thought it was important. And it's, there's been a lot of skepticism since that statement was made. Folks are reappropriating the word woke, and I hate that they have done that, and using it in a pejorative sense. But, politics is politics. I just think that the people who attack ESG and attack stakeholder capitalism, politics is politics. But the business imperative here is pretty clear. And I think that businesses are not stupid. They look at what's going on around the world, and you talk about things like climate, you talk about things like better corporate governance, you talk about things like being invested in your community for the stakeholders that matter, that's your employees, your customers. All those things are real. And so, people can poo-poo it if they'd like. But, the reason that this acronym exists is because there's been recognition by, a lot of people who allocate resources that, these are legit. And, try as you might, you won't escape these broad macro themes that are progressing. And so, what you have is people trying to wrestle with what that looks like. From a public policy perspective, businesses are trying to wrestle with what that might look like from a compliance perspective. I spent the week at another conference as well, the Institute for International Finance. This was a major topic of conversation. And, these are banking regulators and bankers, right? And they're like, oh, what are we gonna do? So there's some growing pains. But, for people to act like it's not a thing, they just haven't been really paying attention. And you talk about historic flooding, you talk about hurricanes at all parts of the year, and that's just the environmental piece. Let's talk about governance and corruption and reining that in. Let's talk about what happens when you don't invest in the communities that you sell into. Let's talk about all those negative externalities, right? Business is a part of a global community. And if business does not pay attention to these things, woe unto them. Because guess who's demanding this focus? Their customers and their employees. So good luck ignoring it. And again, people want to play politics with it, have fun. But I think that what matters, and the businesses understand this, there are commercial considerations at play, and it's not fake, it's a real thing. And so, I think to answer your question directly, I just think you're going to see more of a focus on this. And not less. And it's not from, people who are, only trying to do good. That would be great. But it's people who are looking at the bottom line and understanding the market. The market is demanding a focus on this. And that is what it is. Whether people want to poo-poo it or not, it's observable. And so if you ignore it, good luck.
Good luck. What questions do we have out here? And I don't know if we have a mic runner, but we have a question right here. You could stand and project your voice since we don't have a mic, and then I'll go right here. Oh, we have a mic runner, so here we go.
Thank y'all so much for just having this discussion and having this panel. I'm Michael Franklin, the co-founder and executive director of Speechwriters of Color. And a recent discussion we've had in the field is around how when it comes to creating messages for leaders and demonstrating impact, the words are only as strong as the actions that the leaders take. And so my question is, how in our strategic capacity when advising leaders can we help work with y'all and work alongside y'all to push our leaders towards impact so we can create stronger messaging because they're actually about that action then.
Okay, one of you all want to take that question? That's a great question.
It's a really good question.
Yes, my name is Andre
Oh,
J.
I'm sorry, the panel's trying to answer his question first.
Okay.
And then we have a question right here before we go to Andre, so if we could bring the mic back over here.
Sure.
Panel.
So I'll jump in here, and I think, one, we are all served if we are thinking collectively about the needs of the communities that we're trying to make sure that we are creating really that opportunities for the communities that we're trying to serve, right? So like being on the same message is important. Having the same message, similar messages that they don't have to be the same. They actually just have to, I think, complement each other. Because I know I'm here because I want to make sure that my community, the black people, are given the same opportunities as everyone else. That's why I'm here, right? I want Latinos to have the same opportunities. I want people who, have disabilities to have the same opportunities. But we just need to, I think, come together around we're stronger together, right? So the messaging, I think, is very important. Happy to partner with you and think about what that looks like from the business perspective, from your perspective, and figure out how we can make sure our messaging is aligned with yours.
Excellent. We have a question here, and then Andre, right here, and then
Hello.
Andre.
Yeah, my name is Ayodej Bandeli, President Software Engineer. I came because my friends invited me. But yeah, I guess today we talked a lot about how the government is giving everyone money, right? Corporations. And I think the purview of what a corporation is and what it does is changing a lot, especially as we reach late stage capitalism, right? So as you see your companies becoming more like quasi-governmental, that money that's going to build infrastructure in rural South is going to Comcast, you know what I'm saying? So it's how do you see, what are the conversations you're having about incentive alignment along ESG, racial equity, and things like that as you build out your company to do things that are more focused on what daily life looks like, because it's more, private organizations and less, the government and people like that. So is that clear? Is that clear?
Yeah, and I'll jump in here too. I think, when you look at the infrastructure bill and the work that has to come from that, I think it really hits on some of the points that we were discussing earlier about being intentional about who you work with. So companies need to be intentional about who they're working with, who they're contracting with to help fulfill the needs that need to be met, right? And so they have a very important role to play in that respect. And so when we talk about supplier diversity or business diversity, as I know John Rogers and others like to talk about, that's where it is. And that's where the focus should be when it comes down to getting dollars back into communities that we're intending to serve. So just thinking very intentionally about who you work with, who you partner with, and making sure that they're a reflection of the communities that you're trying to reach.
And I just want to add something briefly. Yes, we're all a part of corporations or large organizations, but these organizations are also a reflection of their people. And so for me, I want to make sure that I'm aligning myself with an organization or an entity that has values that are at least somewhat consistent with the things that I care about. One example is WilmerHale. Within the last few years, my law firm launched a racial justice reform initiative. And that has had tremendous impact, sort of not only internally within our firm in terms of the type of work that we're able to do, but externally in terms of philanthropic dollars that we're able to send out to organizations that are doing racial justice reform related work. Partnering with organizations that are focused on policing, racial equity, et cetera. Thousands of hours by our attorneys have been done or have been contributed to this type of work, and there's so much more that has been done in terms of the money that we're pulling out of one place and putting it in another type of banking institution. All of those types of things are things that the firm has taken on over the last few years plus, and for me, even though I work at this large national organization, et cetera, it's important for me and it's important for managing partners of my law firm, it's important for the partners and other counsel, et cetera, that I work with at the firm. We have certain values that we want to see lived out in the work that we're doing. So I think it's important for all of us to try to continue to find places that are willing to continue to push the needle. Even though my work may focus on white-collar defense litigation or investigations, I also value, and I think it's important to be able to do this type of work that's impacting my community. So we should all continue to push for our organizations to continue to do that type of work.
Excellent. And we're going to take one last question from Andre.
Yeah, my name is Andre J. Babu. I'm an owner of a small startup, obviously in engineering and cybersecurity. So I would like to know how you guys get to monitor a bunch of those institutions, because people like us, the minority in IT and engineering, we've been seeing a lot of the challenges, like when it comes to recruiting. And I know pretty much, you guys probably know better than me that the government trying to promote, the minority, the black actually, within the engineering and other stuff. But yet we see a bunch of those companies going straight outside of the country, to bring those H-1B, to come here, and then they put them in front of the line and left all the black behind and stuff. And yet you see them in the website, start talking about promoting minority and all stuff. And then something else that is so interesting about that, you see pretty much like the front, right? You go in the website, that's sometimes something that strikes us. You go in the front line, you look at pretty much the whole staff there. CEO, board of director, everybody there. All one race.
Any of you all want to take that question? Excellent question. Recruitment, attracting talent, going out of the country. What can we do to combat that?
I'll take a stab at this, and certainly, not my top expertise, but I think, as an international company, I think that, we do have to source talent from all of our markets. And I think that, for a firm that was founded in the United States, that includes here too, right? And, I think it just goes back to, and to your point that you ended with about having the management reflect, customers, and management reflect, some of the representations that have been asserted, right? Some of the communications that are there, including the website. It just goes back to, some of the things we've been talking about reflecting, the society, not ignoring that you are a part of society, and investing intentionally to address shortcomings, as a part of being transparent. I can just sense the frustration in your question. I understand it, and I can, concede that I think, everyone has to do better there. I don't think that it is, somebody used the word earlier, it is definitely a journey. Mm-hmm. It's one that I would say that, most of corporate America is still at the earliest stages of addressing, if I'm just keeping it a buck. And so, it's gatherings like this, it's questions like that, mm-hmm. It's holding companies accountable, it's holding your governments accountable, it's continuing to push on this conversation. I think addressing what you're talking about is not an overnight thing, and that's why we have to keep that same energy, because it is a journey, and it's not. I'm not here to opine on kind of immigration policy or anything like that. I'm just going to say that as a part of a broad hiring mix, as a part of a broad, vendor mix, it's important for companies to keep these considerations in mind. And again, recognize that the stakeholders that matter to them most care about these issues too. And so any shortcomings in any of these departments that are observable, someone's going to hold you accountable that way in the market. And so you should really pay a lot of attention to it.
Great way to end our segment. We truly appreciate the time and contribution of our panelists, so let's give them a huge round of applause. We welcome you to check the Joint Center website for more information and updates regarding the economic policy effort.